Singapore went from a tiny island with zero resources to one of the richest countries on Earth in just 50 years. The average person there is wealthier than the average American. But in 1965, everyone thought Singapore was dead. We just got kicked out of Malaysia. We have no natural resources. We're smaller than New York City. Our unemployment rate is through the roof. We're surrounded by neighbors who hate us, and we have no army. Gentlemen, please, one crisis at a time. Which crisis should we solve first? All of them. Simultaneously. That's impossible. So, how did they pull this off? Well, before we get to the insane comeback story, let's rewind and see how they got into this mess in the first place. For centuries, Singapore was just a sleepy fishing village, nothing special. But in 1819, a British guy named Stamford Raffles showed up and said, "You know what this swampy island needs? A trading port." "But sir, this place is full of mosquitoes and pirates." "Exactly, it's perfect. Plus, look at this location, right between India and China. Do you know how much money we can make?" "How much?" "So much money." And Raffles was right. Singapore's location was absolutely chef's kiss. It sat right at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, perfectly positioned to control trade between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Ships traveling between Europe, India, and China had to pass through here. It was like owning a toll booth on the world's busiest highway. Under British rule, Singapore grew rapidly. Chinese, Indian, and Malay immigrants flooded in, looking for work. The population exploded from a few hundred to hundreds of thousands. Singapore became one of Britain's crown jewels in Asia, a diverse, bustling port city, making everyone rich. Well, mostly making the British rich, but you get the idea. Everything was going great until... "Sir, the Japanese are invading." "Don't worry, young man. Singapore is an impenetrable fortress. We have the big guns. I'm talking massive, a 15-inch naval guns, pointed at the sea, and they are loaded with glorious armor-piercing shells. Do you know what one of those beauties can do to a battleship? It'll punch right through the hull like it's wet paper. We're just daring them to send their navy." "Sir, they're coming from the north, through the jungle." "From the jungle? That's impossible. Everyone knows you can't move an army through the jungle. They're here, sir." "Oh, well, this is embarrassing." In February 1942, the Japanese captured Singapore in what Winston Churchill called the worst disaster in British military history. They were so confident the attack would come from one direction that they left their entire backside completely exposed. And that single blind spot cost them everything. Which brings me to something you're probably doing right now. See, right now someone could be watching everything you do online, and just like the British, it's not going to work for us. But we had a deal. Deal's off. Also, we're imposing tariffs on Singapore. What? That's not fair. Life is not fair. Deal with it. Tensions escalated. Race riots broke out. People died. The situation became untenable. Finally, in 1965, the Malaysian parliament voted to expel Singapore from Malaysia. "Singapore, you're out. You can't kick us out. We're part of Malaysia." "Not anymore, you're not. Are you kidding me? We will die on our own." Good luck with that. On August 9th, 1965, Singapore became an independent nation. And Lee Kuan Yew, the man who had fought so hard to join Malaysia, went on television and cried actual tears. Lee wasn't crying because he was happy. He was crying because he thought Singapore was doomed. And honestly, he had good reasons to think that. Let's review Singapore's situation in 1965. No natural resources, no oil, no minerals, not even enough fresh water, no military to speak of, surrounded by larger neighbors who were, at best, suspicious. High unemployment, racial tensions, an economy dependent on British military bases that might leave at any moment. Singapore's chances of survival? Not great, folks. Not great at all. We're going to die. We're definitely going to die. We're not going to die. How can you be so sure? because I refuse to let us die. Now shut up and listen to my plan. Lee Kuan Yew realized food was scarce. The Japanese renamed Singapore to Shonandong, which means light of the south. Though most people would probably describe the occupation as the opposite of light. After 3.5 years of suffering, the war finally ended in 1945. The British came back, but something had changed. The locals had watched the mighty British Empire get absolutely demolished by the Japanese in less than a week. Suddenly, British rule didn't seem so invincible anymore. Hey, weren't you guys supposed to be protecting us? We're terribly sorry about that. Shall we just pretend it didn't happen? How about no? We want independence? Independence? But you can't run a country by yourselves. We literally just survived 3 years of occupation while you were gone. I think we'll manage. And so began Singapore's journey toward independence. But here's where things get complicated. Singapore was tiny, mostly Chinese, and surrounded by Malaya, which was mostly Malay. The British, looking to exit gracefully, thought, what if we just mash them together? Gentlemen, I have a brilliant idea. What if Singapore joined with Malaya to form Malaysia? I don't know. Will it work? Probably not. But let's try anyway. In 1963, Singapore merged with Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak to form Malaysia. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Singapore would get access to a larger territory and natural resources. Malaysia would get Singapore's economic expertise. Everyone wins, right? Wrong. Almost immediately, tensions erupted. The Malaysian government, dominated by ethnic Malays, wanted policies that favored Malays. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's leader, wanted a Malaysian Malaysia, equality for all races. But the Malaysian Prime Minister was like, yeah, that's the business-friendly place on earth. How? Zero corruption, efficient government, low taxes, rule of law, and we're going to invite every foreign company to set up shop here. We'll be the bridge between East and West. But sir, said the other developing countries will think we're sellouts. Let them think what they want. In 20 years, we'll be rich and they'll still be poor. Now, next problem, housing. Most Singaporeans lived in slums, literal slums, overcrowded, unsanitary, fire-prone slums. Lee Kuan Yew visited them and said, this is unacceptable. Sir, we don't have money for public housing. Find the money. I want everyone in Singapore to have a decent home within a generation. That's impossible. Stop saying things are impossible. Everything's impossible until someone does it. And so the government launched the most ambitious public housing program in history. The Housing Development Board started building apartments at a breakneck pace. But here's the clever part. They didn't just give people homes. They made them affordable to buy. Singapore introduced the Central Provident Fund, basically forced savings. Every worker had to save part of their salary, and they could use those savings to buy their government-built apartment. This meant people owned their homes. They had a stake in the country. The government got money back to build more housing. Everyone had retirement savings. In the north, Indonesia to the south. What if they decided to invade? We need an army, a real one. But sir, we're tiny. How can we defend ourselves? We make ourselves poisonous to swallow. Every male citizen serves in the military. Everyone learns to fight. If anyone attacks us, it'll cost them dearly. Singapore introduced mandatory military service. Every able-bodied male had to serve. Even today, Singaporean men serve 2 years in the military, and Lee wasn't kidding about making Singapore poisonous to swallow. The Singapore Armed Forces became one of the most advanced militaries in Southeast Asia, with modern weapons and training. But here's the thing about all these policies. They worked. Really was genius. By the 1980s, over 80% of Singaporeans lived in public housing that they owned. Try finding that anywhere else in the world. And one of the most important keys to Singapore's success? Education. If we have no natural resources, then our people are the resource. Everyone needs to be educated. Everyone. But sir, many Singaporeans are illiterate. Then teach them, build schools. Lots of schools, and make English the language of instruction. But we have Chinese, Malays, Indians. They all speak different languages. Exactly. English will be neutral. Plus, it's the language of international business. Our kids will be fluent in English and their mother tongue. They'll be able to do business anywhere in the world. This was controversial. Some people thought Lee was erasing local culture, but Lee didn't care. He was playing the long game. Lastly, defense. Remember, Singapore had basically no military in 1965, and they were surrounded by larger neighbors, Malaysia to the control. Lee believed in what he called Asian values: social harmony over individual freedom, order over chaos, the collective good over personal liberty. This meant strict laws like really strict, chewing gum, banned, littering, heavy fines, vandalism, you might get canned. The government controlled the media and kept a tight grip on newspapers and TV. Even Lee's People's Action Party dominated elections, limiting political opposition. Western countries criticized Singapore as authoritarian. Lee's response? Look at our results. Clean streets, low crime, booming economy, high literacy. Maybe your Western liberal democracy isn't the only way to run a country. But what about freedom of speech? You can have all the free speech you want in a failing country. Or you can have prosperity and order. Most people choose prosperity. Next question. Was Lee right? Was he wrong? That's a debate for another time. But here's what's undeniable. It worked. Singapore went from third world to first world in a single generation. By the 1990s, Singapore's GDP per capita exceeded Britain's, the country that had colonized them. Let that sink in. The slums were gone, replaced by gleaming high-rises. The port was one of the busiest in the world. The airport was world-class. The economy was diverse and robust. Singapore had become what economists call an Asian tiger, along with Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan. And in 2015, Lee Kuan Yew died at age 91. The entire nation mourned. People queued for hours to pay respect. Whatever you thought of his methods, you couldn't deny his results. He had taken a tiny, resource-poor island that everyone thought was doomed and turned it into one of the most successful countries on Earth, with GDP per capita higher than the United States. Not bad for a country that was crying on TV in 1965. Yet, Singapore still faces challenges. The country is aging rapidly. Birth rates are low. Housing is expensive. The government is trying to maintain its strict social control in an era of social media and globalization. And there's always the question, what happens to Singapore's unique model as the founding generation passes away? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, Singapore's rise from zero to hero is one of the most remarkable stories in modern history. A tiny island with no resources became an